Mr. Speaker, It's all right, Tracy Ullman's coming. Mr. Speaker, I join the Prime Minister in wishing the Rugby League team all the very best in the competition. I hope they win it. Last week, Mr. Speaker, the House voted by 299 to 0 to pause the rollout of universal credit. Will the Prime Minister respect the will of the House?
As I've said before, we acknowledge the fact that there are concerns people have raised with universal credit. That's why, as we've been rolling it out, we have been listening to those and changes have been made. But perhaps I could just update the House on where we are on the rollout of universal credit. Currently, of people claiming benefits, 8% are on universal credit. By January of next year, that will rise to 10%. The rollout is being conducted in 3 phases, and the intention is that it will be completed by 2022. So it's being done in a measured way, and I'm pleased to say that 4 out of 5 people are satisfied or very satisfied with the service that they are receiving. Universal credit helps people into the workplace, and it makes sure that work pays, and that's what the welfare system should do.
Jeremy Corbyn!
I would have thought, Mr. Speaker, that if only 8% of the rollout has taken place and 20% of the people in receipt of it are dissatisfied with it, that's a cause for thought, maybe a pause in the whole process. And last week, only one Conservative MP had the courage of their convictions to vote with us on suspending universal credit rollout. And then, Mr. Speaker, a Conservative member of the Welsh Assembly, Angela Burns, said, and I quote, "For the life of me, I cannot understand why a 6 or 4 week gap is deemed acceptable." She called universal credit callous at best and downright cruel at worst, and concluded by saying she's ashamed of her government. Can the Prime Minister ease her colleagues' shame by pausing and fixing universal credit?
As I've said to the right honourable gentleman, we have been making changes to the implementation of UC as it has gone through the rollout. But let's be very clear about why we introduced universal credit. It is because it is a system.
The members are getting rather overexcited. The question has been put, and the answer will be heard. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we introduced universal credit as a simpler, more straightforward system that ensures that work pays and helps people into the workplace. Under Labour, let's look at what happened in the benefit system under Labour. Under Labour, the low-paid paid tax and then had it paid back to them in benefits. Under Labour, people were trapped on a life and benefits for years. Under Labour, the number of workless households doubled, and Labour's benefit system cost households an extra £3,000 a year. What the Conservatives have done is given the low-paid a pay rise, given the workers a tax cut, and ensure we've got a benefit system that helps people into work.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, under Labour, 1 million children were lifted out of poverty. Under Labour, we introduced the principle of the national minimum wage, opposed by all Tories over there. And if the Prime Minister is not prepared to listen to Angela Burns, perhaps she could listen to the architect of universal credit, the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green, who said, "One of the reasons I resigned from the government was I didn't actually agree with the additional waiting days. This is something the government needs to look at." Does the Prime Minister agree with him?
I think this is not just the answer that I answer I've given, I think, 3 or 4 times now in this PMQs, but in previous PMQs. But as we look at universal credit rollout, we do look at the way in which we're introducing it. But he talks about what happened under Labour, and I'm happy to talk about what happened under Labour.
Far too much noise and finger-pointing on both sides of the chamber. The responses from the Prime Minister will be heard, as will the questions from the Leader of the Opposition and every other member, without fear or favour. The Prime Minister.
Under the Labour Party, the Right Honourable Gentleman is talking about rolling out of new benefit system. Well, let's think about what happened when the Labour Party rushed to introduce tax credits. Not the only Member of Parliament in this House who had people in my constituency surgery, who had filled the forms in properly, who had given their information to the authorities, and then years later the government came back and landed them with bills for thousands of pounds. That's what's happened when you rush into a system rather than introducing it properly as we are.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, I thought we passed the threshold last week when the Prime Minister was going to answer questions, but we're obviously haven't achieved that yet. Labour introduced working tax credits in order to help people on low pay out of poverty, and it made a very big difference. But, Mr. Speaker, the sad truth is that universal credit is in such a mess that councils are forced to pick up the bill. I'll give you an example. Croydon Council, which piloted the scheme, is now spending £3 million of its own budget to prevent tenants from being evicted due to rent arrears caused by universal credit. Does the Prime Minister think it is right or fair that hard-pressed local authorities, having their budget cut by central government, having to dip into what little money they've got left in order to prevent people being evicted when they know full well it's the responsibility of this government and its system of universal credit that's causing the problem?
Labour introduced working tax credits and then clawed thousands of pounds back from people who were working hard. He raises the issue of rent arrears, and I know that members have concerns over people who are managing their budgets to pay their rent. For the vast majority of people on universal credit, this is not an issue, managing their budget. And indeed, after 4 months, the number of people on universal credit who are in arrears has fallen by a third. But we recognise the issue, so we're working with landlords. We've built flexibility into the system so that actually landlords can be paid directly. And I want to be clear that nobody can be legally evicted from social housing due to short-term rent arrears. I think that's an important point for us to get across to people. But I come back to the essential point about universal credit. This is about a welfare system that helps people into work, that makes work pay, and that doesn't trap people in a life on benefits for years.
Jeremy Corbyn!
I note the Prime Minister couldn't say anything about people being evicted from the private rented sector because of universal credit problems. Mr. Speaker, the costs in the benefit system are being driven by low pay and high rents. In 2015, the then Chancellor, her former friend, promised a £9 an hour living wage. However, at the March budget, it was sneaked out the government's minimum wage would only reach £8.75. The welfare state was not created to subsidise low-paying employers and overcharging landlords. So will the budget in November put the onus back?
Order! Order! Mr. Hoare, I expect better of you. You were much better behaved when you were at Oxford University. What's happened to you, man? Calm yourself. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, my question is this. Will the budget in November put the onus back onto employers to pay a decent wage so that workers can make ends meet?
Of course we want to ensure that there are higher paid jobs in this country. That's precisely why we're investing in the economy for the future. It's precisely why we're investing in our infrastructure, investing in skills for young people, and it's why we're introducing a modern industrial strategy. But the right honourable gentleman says that he didn't want, that the welfare system wasn't created to subsidise employers who are paying low wages. That's exactly what Labour's working taxpayer system did.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, the government's own Social Mobility Commission reported that low pay was endemic in the United Kingdom. 1 in 4 workers permanently stuck in low-paid jobs. That's why Labour backs a real living wage of £10 per hour to make work pay. Mr. Speaker, this government doesn't really know whether it's coming or going. They say... Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party and the government says they have full confidence in universal credit, but won't vote for it. They say they will end the NHS pay cap, but won't allocate any money to pay for it. The Communities Secretary backs £50 billion of borrowing on housing, but the Chancellor says it's not policy. The Brexit Secretary says they're planning for a no-deal Brexit. The Chancellor says they're not. Isn't the case, Mr. Speaker, this government is weak, incompetent, divided and unable to take a decision.
Order! I said that the responses from the Prime Minister would be heard. And the remarks of the right honourable gentleman will be heard. You can try to shout him down, and other members can try to shout the Prime Minister down. It won't work. End of. Jeremy Corbyn.
Isn't it the case that this government is weak, incompetent and divided and unable to take the essential decisions necessary for the good of the people of this country?
Now, I will tell the right honourable gentleman, of course we want to see people earning higher wages. Of course we want, as we are doing, to be able to ensure we can invest in our public services. But the way to do that, the way to have a higher standard of living, to have higher wages, to invest in our public services, to have a better future for people in this country, is to build and continue to build that stronger economy. And you don't build a stronger economy by losing control of public finances. You don't build a stronger economy by uncontrolled borrowing. You don't build a stronger economy by hitting people with the highest taxes in our peacetime history. You don't build a stronger economy by voting against progress in our Brexit negotiations. And you don't build a stronger economy by planning for capital flight and a run on the pound. That's what Labour would do, and we will never let it happen.